Hey guys, and welcome back to another reading of Harry Potter. We are ready to start chapter 9, okay? The Midnight Duel. This one's about 24 minutes long, so if you want to split it up, you can. If you want to sit and watch it all, you can. It's up to you. The Midnight Duel. Harry had never believed he would meet a boy whom he hated more than Dudley. But that was before he met Draco Malfoy. Still, first-year Gryffindors only had potions with Slytherins, so they didn't have to put up with Malfoy much, or at least they didn't until they spotted a notice pinned on the Gryffindor common room that made them all groan. Flying lessons would be starting on Thursday, and Gryffindor and Slytherin would be learning together. Typical, said Harry darkly. Just what I always wanted, to make a fool of myself on a broomstick in front of Malfoy. He'd been looking forward to learning to fly more than anything else. You don't know that you'll make a fool of yourself, said Ron reasonably. Anyway, I know Malfoy's always going on about how good he is at Quidditch, but I bet that's all talk. Malfoy certainly did talk about flying a lot. He complained loudly about first years never getting on the house Quidditch teams and told long boastful stories that always seemed to end with him narrowly escaping muggles in helicopters. He wasn't the only one, though. The way Seamus Finnegan told it, he'd spent most of his childhood zooming around on the countryside on a broomstick. Even Ron would tell anyone who listened about the time he almost hit a hang glider on Charlie's old broom. Everyone from Wizarding family talked about Quidditch constantly. Ron had already had a big argument with Dean Thomas, who shared their dormitory, about soccer. Ron couldn't see what was exciting about a game with only one ball where no one was allowed to fly. Harry caught Ron prodding through Dean's poster of the West Ham soccer team, trying to make the players move. Neville had never been on a broomstick his entire life because his grandmother had never let him near one. Privately, Harry felt she'd had good reason, because Neville managed to have extraordinarily number of accidents with both feet planted on the ground. Hermione Granger was almost as nervous about flying as Neville was. This was something you couldn't learn by heart or out of a book. Not that she hadn't tried. At breakfast on Thursday, she bored them with all the flying tips she'd gotten out of a library book called Quidditch Through the Ages. Neville was hanging on to every word, desperate for anything that might help him hang on to his broomstick later. But everyone else was very pleased when Hermione's lecture was interrupted by the arrival of the mail. Harry hadn't had a single letter since Hagrid's note, something that Malfoy had been quick to notice, of course. Malfoy's eagle owl was always bringing him packages of sweets from home, which he opened gloatingly at the Slytherin table. A barn owl brought Neville a small package from his grandmother. He opened it excitedly and showed them a glass ball the size of a large marble, which seemed to be full of white smoke. "It's a remember ball," he explained. "Gran knows I forget things. This tells you if there's something you've forgotten to do. Look, you hold it tight like this, and if it turns red," his face fell, because the remember-all suddenly glowed scarlet. "You've forgotten something." Neville was trying to remember what he'd forgotten when Draco Malfoy, who was passing the Gryffindor table, snatched the remember-all out of his hand. Harry and Ron jumped with their feet. They were half hoping for a reason to fight Malfoy, but Professor McGonagall, who could spot trouble quicker than any teacher in the school, was there in a flash. "What's going on?" "Malfoy's got my remember-all, Professor." Scowling, Malfoy quickly dropped the remember-all back into the table. "Just looking," he said, as he sloped away with Crabbe and Goyle behind him. At 3:30 that afternoon, Harry and Ron and the other Gryffindors hurried down the front steps onto their grounds for the first flying lesson. It was a clear, breezy day, and the grass rippled under their feet as they marched down the sloping lawns toward the smooth, flat lawn of the opposite sides of the grounds, to the Forbidden Forest, whose trees were swaying darkly in the distance. The Slytherins were already there, and so were 20 broomsticks lying in neat lines on the ground. Harry had heard Fred and George Weasley complain about the school brooms, saying that some of them started to vibrate when you flew too high or always flew slightly to the left. Their teacher, Madam Hooch, arrived. She had short, gray hair and yellow eyes like a hawk. "Well, what are you all waiting for?" she barked. "Everyone, stand by a broomstick. Come on, hurry up." Harry glanced down at his broom. It was old, and some of the twigs stuck out at odd angles. "Stick out your right hand over your broom," called Madam Hooch at the front, "and say, 'up.'" "Up!" everyone shouted. Harry's broom jumped into his hand at once. But it was one of the few things it did. Hermione Granger's had simply rolled over on the ground, and Neville's hadn't moved at all. Perhaps brooms, like horses, could tell when you were afraid, thought Harry, thought Harry. There was a quaver in Neville's voice that said only too clearly that he wanted to keep his flat feet flat on the ground. Madam Hooch then showed them how to mount their brooms without sliding off the end, and walked up and down the rows correcting their grips. Harry and Ron were delighted when she told them Malfoy had been doing it wrong for years. "Now, when I blow my whistle, you kick off the ground hard," said Madam Hooch. "Keep your broom steady, rise a few feet, and come straight back down, leaning forward slightly. On my whistle. 3, 2... But Neville, nervous and jumpy and frightened of being left on the ground, pushed off hard before the whistle had even touched Madam Hooch's lips. "Come back, boy!" she shouted, but Neville was rising straight up in the air like a cork shot out of a bottle. 12 feet, 20 feet. Harry saw his scared white face look down at the ground, falling away. Saw him gasp, slip sideways, off the broom, and wham! A thud and a nasty crack, and Neville lay face down in the grass in a heap. His broomstick was still rising higher and higher, and started to drift lazily toward the Forbidden Forest and out of sight. Madam Hooch was bending over Neville, her face as wide as his. "Broken wrist?" Harry heard her mutter. "Come on, boy. It's all right. Up you get." She turned to the rest of the class. "None of you is to move while I take this boy to the hospital wing. You will leave those rooms where they are, or you'll be out of Hogwarts before you can say Quidditch. Come on, dear." Neville, his face tear-streaked, clutching his wrist, hobbled off with Madam Hooch, who had had her arm around him. No sooner were they out of earshot than Malfoy burst into laughter. Did you see his face? The great lump. The other Slytherins joined in. "Be quiet, Malfoy," snapped Patel. "Oh, sticking up for Longbottom," said Pansy Parkinson, a hard-faced Slytherin girl. "Never thought you'd like a little fat crybabies, Pavarotti." "Look," said Malfoy, darting forward and snatching something out of the grass. "It's that thing Longbottom's grand sent." The Remember Ball glittered in the sun as he held it up. "Give that here, Malfoy," said Harry quietly. Everyone stopped talking to watch. Malfoy smiled nastily. "I think I'll leave it somewhere for Longbottom to find." "How about up in a tree?" "Give it here," Harry yelled. But Malfoy had leapt on his broomstick and taken off. He hadn't been lying there. He couldn't fly well. Hovering level with the topmost branches of an oak, he called, "Come and get it, Potter!" Harry grabbed his broom. "No!" shouted Hermione Granger. "Madam Hooch told us not to move. You'll get us all into trouble." Harry ignored her. Blood was pounding in his ears. He mounted the broom and he kicked hard against the ground, and up he soared. Air rushed through his hair. His robes whipped out behind him, and in a rush of fierce joy, he realized he'd found something he could do without even being taught. This was easy. This was wonderful. He pulled his broomstick up a little bit to take it even higher. He heard screams and gasps of girls back on the ground, and admiring a whoop from Ron. He turned his broomstick sharply to face Malfoy midair. Malfoy looked stunned. "Give it here," Harry called, "or I'll knock you off that broom." "Oh yeah," said Malfoy, trying to sneer, but looking a little worried. Harry knew somehow what to do. He leaned forward and grasped the broom tightly in both hands, and he shot it toward Malfoy just like a javelin. Malfoy only just got out of the way in time. Harry made a sharp about face and held the broom steady. A few people below were clapping. "No, Crabbe and Goyle up here to save your neck, Malfoy!" Or "No Crabbe and Goyle up here to save your neck, Malfoy!" Harry called. The same thought seemed to have struck Malfoy. "Catch it if you can, then," he shouted, and he threw the glass ball high into the air and streaked back towards the ground. Harry saw, as though in slow motion, the ball rise up in the air and then start to fall. He leaned forward and pointed his broom handle down. Next second, he was gathering speed in a steep dive, racing for the ball. Wind whistled in his ears, mingled with the screams of people watching. He stretched out a hand, a foot from the ground. He caught it, just in time to pull his broom straight, and he toppled gently into the grass, with the Remember-All clutched safely in his fist. "Harry Potter!" His heart sank faster than he dived. Professor McGonagall was running toward them. He got to his feet, trembling. "Never! In all my time at Hogwarts!" Professor McGonagall was almost speechless with shock, and her glasses flashed furiously. "How dare you! You might have broken your neck!" "It wasn't his fault, Professor." "Be quiet, Miss Patel." "But Malfoy—" "That's enough," said Mr. Weasley Potter. "Follow me now." Harry caught sight of Malfoy, Crabbe, and Goyle's triumphant faces as he left, walking numbly, in Professor McGonagall's wake as she strode toward the castle. He was going to be expelled. He just knew it. He wanted to say something to defend himself, but there seemed to be something wrong with his voice. Professor McGonagall was sweeping along without even looking at him. He had to jog to even keep up. Now he'd done it. He hadn't even lasted 2 weeks. He'd been packing his bags in 10 minutes. What would the Dursleys say when he turned up on the doorstep? Up on the front steps, the marble staircase inside, and still Professor McGonagall didn't say a word to him. She wrenched open the doors and marched along the corridors with Harry trotting miserably behind her. Maybe she was taking him to Dumbledore. He thought of Hagrid, expelled but allowed to stay as a gamekeeper. Perhaps he could be Hagrid's assistant. His stomach twisted as he imagined it, watching Ron and the others becoming wizards while he stumped around the grounds carrying Hagrid's bag. Professor McGonagall stopped outside the classroom. She opened a door and poked her head inside. "Excuse me, Professor Flitwick. Could I borrow wood for a moment?" Wood, thought Harry, bewildered. Was wood a cane she was going to use on him? But Wood turned out to be a person, a burly fifth-year boy who came out of Flitwick's class looking confused. "Follow me, you two," said Professor McGonagall, and they marched up the corridor, Wood looking curiously at Harry. In here, Professor McGonagall pointed them to a classroom that was empty except for Peeves, who was busy writing rude words on the blackboard. "Out, Peeves!" she barked. Peeves threw the chalk in a bin, which clanged loudly, and he swooped out, cursing Professor McGonagall. He slammed the door behind him and turned to face the two boys. "Potter, this is Oliver Wood. Wood, I've found you a seeker." Wood's expression changed from puzzlement to delight. "Are you serious, Professor?" "Absolutely," said Professor McGonagall crisply. "The boy's a natural. I've never seen anything like it. Was it your first time on a broomstick, Potter?" Harry nodded silently. He didn't have a clue what was going on, but he didn't seem to be expelled, and some feeling changed him to make him feel better. "He caught that thing in his hand at a 50-foot dive," Professor McGonagall told Wood. "Didn't even scratch himself. Charlie Weasley couldn't have done it." Wood was now looking as though all of his dreams had come true at once. "Ever seen a game of Quidditch, Potter?" he asked excitedly. Wood's the captain of the Gryffindor team," Professor McGonagall explained. "He's just the build for a seeker, too," said Wood, now walking around Harry and staring at him. "Light? Speedy? We'll have to get him a decent broom. Professor Nimbus, 2000, a clean sweep 7, I'd say. I shall speak to Professor Dumbledore and see if we can bend the first-year rule. Heaven knows we need a better team than last year. Flattened in that last match by Slytherin, I couldn't look Severus Snape in the face for weeks." Professor McGonagall peered sternly over her glasses at Harry. "I want to hear you're training hard, Potter, or I may change my mind about punishing you." Then she suddenly smiled. "Your father would have been proud," she said. "He was an excellent Quidditch player himself." "You're joking." It was dinner time. Harry had just finished telling Ron what happened when he left the grounds with Professor McGonagall. Ron had a piece of steak and a kidney pie halfway in his mouth, but he'd forgotten all about it. "Seeker," he said. "But first years, never. You must be the youngest house player in about a century," said Harry, shoveling the pie in his mouth. He felt particularly hungry after the excitement of the afternoon. "Wood told me." Ron was so amazed and impressed that he just sat there and gaped at Harry. I start training next week," said Harry, "only don't tell any Wood. Wood wants to keep it a secret." Fred and George Weasley now came into the hall, spotted Harry, and hurried over. "Well done," said George in a low voice. "Wood told us. We're on the team, too. Beaters." "I tell you, we're going to win the Quidditch Cup for sure this year," said Fred. "We haven't won since Charlie left, but this year's team, it's going to be brilliant. You must be good, Harry. Wood was almost skipping when he told us. Anyway, we've got to go. Lee Jordan reckons he found us a new secret passageway out of school. I bet it's that one behind the statue of Gregory that we found in our first week. See ya." Fred and George hardly disappeared when someone far less welcome came up. Malfoy, flanked by Crabbe and Goyle. "Having a last meal, Potter? When you get in the train back to Muggles?" "You're a lot braver now that you got back on the ground with your little friends with you," Harry said coolly. There was, of course, nothing at all little about Crabbe and Goyle, but as the high table was full of teachers, neither of them could do more than crack their knuckles and scowl. "I'll take you on any time on my own," said Malfoy. "Tonight if you want. Wizard's duel. Wands only, no contact." "What's the matter? Never heard of a wizard's duel before, I suppose?" "Of course he has," said Ron, wheeling around. "I'm his second. Who's yours?" Malfoy looked at Crabbe and Goyle, sizing them up. "Crabbe," he said. Midnight. All right, we'll meet you in the trophy room. That's always unlocked. When Malfoy had gone, Ron and Harry looked at each other. What's a wizard's duel? Said Harry. And what do you mean you're my second? Well, a second's there to take you over if you die, said Ron casually, getting started on his last cold pie. Catching the look on Harry's face, he added quickly, but people only die in proper duels, with real wizards. The most you and Malfoy will be able to do is send sparks at each other. Neither one of you knows enough magic to do any real damage. But I expected you would refuse anyway. And what if I wave my wand and nothing happens? Throw it away and then punch him on the nose, Ron suggested. Excuse me? They both looked up. It was Hermione Granger. Can't a person eat in peace in this place, said Ron. Hermione ignored him and spoke to Harry. I couldn't help overhearing what you and Malfoy were saying. Bet you could, Ron muttered. And you mustn't go wandering around the school at night. Think of the points you'll lose for Gryffindor if you're caught. And you're bound to be. It's really very, very selfish of you. And it's really none of your business, said Harry. Goodbye, said Ron. All the same, it wasn't what you call the perfect end to a day. Harry thought as he lay awake much later listening to Dean and Seamus falling asleep. Neville wasn't back from the hospital wing. Ron had spent all evening giving him advice such as, if he tries to curse you, you better dodge it, because I can't remember how to block them. There was a very good chance that they were going to get caught by Filch or Mrs. Norris, and Harry felt he was being pushed in his luck breaking another school rule today. On the other hand, Malfoy's sneering face kept looming up out of the darkness. This was his big chance to beat Malfoy face to face. He couldn't miss. 11:30, Ron muttered at last, we better go. They pulled on their bathrobes, picked up their wands, and crept across the tower room, down the spiral staircase, and into the Gryffindor common room. A few embers were still glowing in the fireplace, turning all the armchairs into hunched black shadows. They had almost reached the portrait hole when a voice spoke from a chair nearest them. I can't believe you're going to do this, Harry. A lamp flickered on. It was Hermione Granger, wearing a pink bathrobe and a frown. You, said Ron furiously, go back to bed. I almost told your brother, Hermione snapped. Percy, he's a perfect, and he put a stop to this. Harry couldn't believe anyone could be so infuriating. Come on, he said to Ron. He pushed open the portrait of the fat lady and climbed through the hole. Hermione wasn't going to give up that easily. She followed Ron through the portrait hole, hissing at them like an angry goose. Don't you care about Gryffindor? You do only care about yourselves. I don't want Slytherin to win the House Cup. And you'll lose all the points like I got from Professor McGonagall for knowing about switching spells. Go away. All right, but I warned you. You just remember what I said when you're on the train home tomorrow. But what they were, they didn't find out. Hermione had turned the portrait of the fat lady to get back inside and found herself facing an empty painting. The fat lady had gone on a nighttime visit, and Hermione was locked out of Gryffindor Tower. Now what am I going to do? She asked shrilly. That's your problem, said Ron. We've got to go. We're going to be late. They hadn't even reached the end of the corridor when Hermione caught up with them. I'm coming with you, she said. You are not. You think I'm going to stand out here and wait for Filch to catch me? If he finds the three of us, I'll tell him the truth, that I was trying to stop you, and you can back me up. You've got some nerve, said Ron loudly. Be quiet, both of you, said Harry sharply. I heard something. It was a short shuffling sound. Mrs. Norris? Breathed Ron, squinting through the dark. It wasn't Mrs. Norris, it was Neville. He was curled up on the floor, fast asleep, but jerked suddenly awake when they crept nearer. Thank goodness you found me. I've been out here for hours. I couldn't remember the new password to get in bed. Keep your voice down, Neville. The password's pig snout, but it won't help you now. The fat lady's gone off somewhere. How's your arm, said Harry. Fine, said Neville, showing them. Madame Pomfrey mended it in about a minute. Good. Well, look, Neville, we've got to be somewhere. We'll see you later. Don't leave me, said Neville, scrambling to his feet. I don't want to stay here alone. The Bloody Baron's been passed twice already. Ron looked at his watch and then glared furiously at Hermione and Neville. If either of you gets us caught, I'll never rest until I've learned that curse of the boogie's quirrell I told you about and use it on you. Hermione opened her mouth, perhaps to tell Ron exactly how to use the curse of the boogies, but Harry hissed at her to be quiet and beckoned them all forward. They flitted along the corridor striped with bars of moonlight from the high windows. At every turn, Harry expected to run into Filch or Mrs. Norris, but they were lucky. They sped up a staircase to the third floor and tiptoed toward the trophy room. Malfoy and Crabbe weren't there yet. The crystal trophy cases glimmered where the moonlight caught them. Cups, shields, plates, statues, they winked in silver and gold, all in the darkness. They edged along the walls, keeping their eyes on the doors, and keeping their eyes on the doors at either end of the room. Harry took out his wand in case Malfoy leapt out and started at once. The minutes crept by. "He's late. Chickened out," Ron whispered. Then, a noise in the next room made them jump. Harry had not just raised his wand when he heard someone speak, and it wasn't Malfoy. "Sniff around, my sweet. They might be lurking in the corner." It was Filch, speaking to Mrs. Norris. Horror-struck, Harry waved madly at the other three to follow them quickly as possible. They scurried silently toward the door, away from Filch's voice. Neville's robes had barely whipped around the corner when he heard Filch enter the trophy room. "They're in here somewhere. I heard them mutter. Probably hiding." "This way," Harry Potter mouthed to the others, and petrified they began to creep down a long gallery full of suits of armor. They could hear Filch getting near. Neville suddenly let out a frightened squeak and broke into a run. He tripped and grabbed Ron around the waist, and the pair of them toppled right into a suit of armor. The clanging and crashing were enough to wake the whole castle. "Run!" Harry yelled, and the four of them sprinted down the gallery, not looking back to see whether Filch was following. They swung around the doorstep and galloped down the corridor after another. Harry led the way without any idea of where they were going. They ripped through a tapestry and found themselves in a hidden passageway, hurtled along it, and then came out near Charm's classroom, which they knew was miles from the trophy room. "I think we've lost him," Harry said, leaning against a cold wall and wiping his forehead. Neville was bent down, wheezing and sputtering. "I told you," Hermione gasped, clutching at the stitch on her chest. "I told you." "We've got to get back to Gryffindor Tower," said Ron. "Quickly as possible." "Malfoy tricked you," Hermione said to Harry. "You realize that, don't you? He was never going to meet you. Filch knew someone was going to be in the trophy room. Malfoy must have tipped him off." Harry thought she was probably right, but he wasn't going to tell her that. "Let's go." It wasn't going to be that simple. They hadn't gone more than a dozen places when a doorknob rattled, and something came shooting out of a classroom in front of them. It was Peeves. He caught sight of them and gave a squeal of delight. "Be quiet, Peeves, please. You'll get us thrown out." Peeves cackled. "Wandering around at midnight, ickle firsties. Naughty, naughty, naughty. You'll get caughty." "Not if you don't give us away, Peeves, please." Should I tell Flitch, should I?" said Peeves in a saintly voice, but his eyes glittered wickedly. "It's for your own good, you know." "Get out of the way," snapped Ron, taking a swipe at Peeves. This was a big mistake. "Students out of bed!" Peeves bellowed. "Students out of bed down in the Charms corridor!" Ducking under Peeves, they ran for their lives, right into the end of the corridor where they slammed into a door. And it was locked. "This is it," Ron moaned as they pushed helplessly at the door. "We're done. This is the end." They could hear footsteps. Flitch running as fast as he could toward Peeves' shouts. "Oh, move over!" Hermione snarled. She grabbed Harry's wand and tapped the lock and whispered, "Alamanora." The lock clicked and the door swung open. They piled through it, shut it quickly, and pressed their ears against it, listening. "Which way did they go?" "Peeves," Filch was saying. "Quick, tell me. Say, please." "Oh, say please. Don't you mess with me, Peeves. Not now. Where did they go?" "I shan't say nothing if you don't say please," said Peeves in his annoying sing-song voice. "All right, please." "Nothing. Ha ha ha. I told you I wouldn't say nothing if you didn't say please. Ha ha ha." And they heard the sound of Peeves whooshing away and Filch cursing. "He thinks this door is locked," Harry whispered. "I think we'll be okay. Get off, Neville." For Neville had been tugging on their sleeve of Harry's bathrobe for the last minute. "What?" Harry turned around and saw quite clearly what. For a moment, he wasn't sure if he walked into a nightmare. This was too much on top of everything that happened so far. They weren't in a room as he supposed. They were in a corridor. The forbidden corridor on the 3rd floor. And now they knew why it was forbidden. They were looking straight into the eyes of a monstrous dog. A dog that filled the whole space between the ceiling and the floor. It had 3 heads, 3 pairs of rolling, mad eyes, 3 noses, twitching and quivering in their direction, 3 drooling mouths, saliva hanging in slippery ropes from yellowish fangs. It was standing quite still, all 6 eyes staring at them, and Harry knew that the only reason they weren't already dead was that their sudden appearance had struck it by surprise. But it was quickly getting over that. There was no mistaking what those thunderous growls meant. Harry groped for the doorknob. Between Filch and death, he'd take Filch. They fell backward. Harry slammed the door shut, and they ran, almost flew back down the corridor. Filch must have hurried off to look for them somewhere else because he didn't see him anywhere, but they hardly cared. All they wanted to do was put as much space possible between them and that monster. They didn't stop running until they reached the portrait of the fat lady on the 7th floor. "Where on earth have you all been?" she asked, looking at their bathrobes hanging from their shoulders and their flushed, sweaty faces. "Never mind that. Pig snout, panted Harry, and the portrait flung forward. They scrambled into the common room and all collapsed trembling onto the armchairs. It was a while before any of them said anything. Neville, indeed, looked as if he'd never speak again. What do you think they're doing? Keeping anything like that locked up in a school?" said Ron finally. "If any dog needs exercise, that one does." Hermione had got both her breath and her bad temper back again. "You don't use your eyes, any of you do you?" she said. "Didn't you see what it was standing on?" "The floor?" Harry suggested. "I wasn't looking at its feet. I was too busy with its head." "No, not the floor. It was standing on a trap door. Obviously, it's guarding something." She stood up, glaring at them. "I hope you're pleased with yourselves. We could have all been killed, or worse, expelled. Now, if you don't mind, I am going to bed." Ron stared at her with his mouth open. "No, we don't mind," he said. "You'd think we dragged you along, wouldn't you?" But Hermione had given Harry something else to think about as he climbed back into bed. The dog was guarding something. What had Hagrid said? Gringotts was the safest place in the world for something if you wanted to hide. Except, perhaps, Hogwarts. It looked as though Harry had found out what the grubby little package from the Vault 713 was. That was a pretty good one. Alright, next one we'll read is Chapter 10, and I hope you enjoyed Chapter 9. I thought that was great, and I miss you guys very much.